I knew the HOA was going to blow a gasket the second I poured the first bucket of concrete, but I didn't care. It was my land clearly marked on the county plat, purchased fair and square, and I'd spent over a year planning my new detached garage. Nothing fancy. Sloped roof, clean wood siding, and finally space for my tools and fishing gear. But apparently I'd committed a cardinal sin. I blocked the view of the HOA president's backyard koi pond. Her name was Karrenna Billings. Late 50s, bleach blonde bob, voice like a fire alarm. She showed up 3 days after the frame was up, marching through my side yard without knocking. "You can't build this here, Damon," she barked, pointing a perfectly manicured fingernail at the structure. "You're obstructing the aesthetic cohesion of the block." I wiped the sawdust off my jeans. "Karrenna, this is my land. I've got the permit, the plans were approved by the city, and this isn't even within HOA jurisdiction." Her eyes narrowed. "We voted to annex this section last year." "No, you tried," I said, "and the county denied it, remember?" "Your little annexation party wasn't as official as you thought." She turned red. "You're going to regret this," I laughed. "Not as much as you're going to regret trespassing." She stomped off, but I knew that wasn't the end of it. A week later, I got the lawsuit. Apparently, the HOA was suing me for illegal construction, visual obstruction, and this one really floored me: emotional distress caused by architectural disruption. They even claimed I was devaluing the neighborhood. My lawyer, a buddy named Theo who owed me a favor, nearly choked on his sandwich reading the complaint. "They're suing you for building on your own property," he said. "This is going to be fun." The court date was set for a month later. Karrenna paraded around the neighborhood like she'd already won, telling anyone who'd listen that my garage was an eyesore and that she was restoring the harmony of Maple Hollow. She even circulated a flyer with a photoshopped image of my garage towering like a skyscraper. I didn't respond. I just kept building. Finished the siding, painted it to match my house, and installed the motion lights. Every nail I hammered felt like a little victory. Then, 2 days before the hearing, I caught her, on my security footage. Karrenna, at midnight, creeping around my backyard, holding a tape measure and a flashlight. She was measuring the structure from my fence. I printed the pictures, all of them, and brought them to court. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and ego. Every chair in the back row was filled neighbors, mostly. Some wore expressions of thinly veiled curiosity. Others looked like they'd been dragged there by Karrenna herself. She strutted into the room in a navy pantsuit, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I walked in alone, holding a file folder tucked under my arm and a cup of burnt coffee I'd picked up from the vending machine in the lobby. Judge Hadley was already seated, flipping through a stack of briefs like she'd seen this nonsense before. She glanced up once, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Maple Hollow Homeowners Association versus Damon Roads. Let's begin." Karrenna's attorney stood first, a wiry man with a clipped mustache and a voice like dry toast. He launched into a speech about neighborhood integrity and community expectations of visual continuity. I didn't interrupt. I just opened my folder and waited. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. "You're asserting that the structure in question violates HOA guidelines. Yet I see here the defendant's property is outside your governing boundary." He cleared his throat. "We filed for expansion of jurisdiction last year, Your Honor. Denied by the county zoning board," I said, handing a stamped copy of the denial to the bailiff, who delivered it to the bench. Judge Hadley read it, then looked up. "You were informed of this decision?" Karrenna leaned in and whispered something to her attorney, who hesitated before replying. "We believed the county had not finalized the decision." "I'm looking at a certified rejection from over 9 months ago," the judge replied. "And yet you proceeded to file a civil suit." I raised my hand slightly. "Your Honor, I'd also like to submit video evidence." She nodded. "Proceed." I plugged a flash drive into the courtroom monitor. The footage loaded, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. Karrenna, sneaking along the side of my property late at night, flashlight in hand, pausing to measure my foundation. The moment her face turned toward the motion sensor, the screen froze, gasps bubbled from the back of the courtroom. One of the board members sank slightly in his chair, Karrenna stiffened. That was for documentation purposes. On private property at night, the judge asked. Did you have permission to be there? Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. We were verifying claim details. There was no intent to trespass. Judge Hadley leaned back. Intent or not, you entered property you do not control. That introduces a new dimension to this case. I'm referring this portion to the county prosecutor for review under unauthorized entry statutes. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Karrenna tried to speak, but the judge silenced her with a raised hand. Let's return to the original complaint. You claim Mr. Rhodes' structure causes emotional distress and devalues the homes within your HOA. She nodded tightly. You have expert testimony on property valuation. Her attorney stood again. We have statements from several residents. Statements are not expert testimony, the judge said, already unimpressed. Do you have a licensed appraiser's report? He glanced down at his folder, then visibly winced. No, Your Honor, I stepped forward. May I submit mine? The judge gestured toward the bench. I handed the report over, signed and sealed by a certified appraiser, showing that not only had my structure not devalued neighboring property, but it had actually increased my own home's appraised value by nearly 15%. The judge read through it, then looked at Karrenna. So far, you filed a claim unsupported by jurisdiction, entered private property without consent, and failed to produce any verifiable evidence to support your accusations. Karrenna's voice cracked. But our community, this isn't about your community, the judge interrupted. This is about the law. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Mr. Rhodes, Judge Hadley continued, do you intend to pursue damages? I opened my folder one last time. Yes, Your Honor. I've had to pay legal fees, lost workdays, and experienced reputational harm due to the public nature of the HOA's campaign against me. Additionally, I'd like to request a restraining order to prevent further unauthorized entry onto my property. The judge nodded slowly. Very well. I'm dismissing the HOA's case with prejudice. I am also granting the restraining order effective immediately. As for damages, we will schedule a separate hearing to determine financial restitution. Karrenna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, I didn't say anything to the crowd of people milling around. I didn't have to. Karrenna's reputation had already started to unravel. The board members who had stood beside her now kept their distance, and a few neighbors approached me with hesitant, apologetic nods. One of them, a man named Greg who lived 2 doors down, cleared his throat. Didn't know all that was going on. Should have asked you about it before, I nodded. It's not about siding with anyone. It's about looking at the facts. He glanced around. She told us you'd built over the property line. That's why I pulled the plat and permits before I poured a single slab. Everything's on paper. Everything's legal. Greg scratched his head. She made it sound like you were building a warehouse. I laughed once, dry and tired. It's a garage for my canoe and tools. He looked back toward the courthouse doors. Never seen her lose like that. She didn't just lose, I said, sliding the flash drive back into my pocket. She exposed herself. I spent the next few days tying up loose ends. The county prosecutor called to confirm they were opening an investigation into unauthorized surveillance and trespassing. Apparently, this wasn't the first time Karrenna had crossed a line, just the first time someone had caught her on camera. An anonymous tip, likely from one of her own board members, helped uncover a pattern. Photos taken of other homes under the guise of compliance checks, a locked filing cabinet in the HOA clubhouse containing dossiers on residents who had pushed back against her, and a series of misappropriated funds earmarked for community beautification that somehow always ended up funding her personal landscaping. It snowballed fast. Within 2 weeks, Karrenna resigned as HOA president. No ceremony, no farewell message. Just a quiet email sent at midnight and a "for sale" sign in front of her house a few days later. The new acting president, a woman named Eliza who worked in IT and didn't seem to care about koi ponds or wind chimes, called me personally. "I read the court transcript," she said. "We're reviewing everything, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry. This shouldn't have happened." "I appreciate that," I said, "but let's make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." She agreed. I finished the garage that weekend, hung the final door, painted over the last edge. When I stood back and looked at it, just a simple building with clean lines and a solid roof, it felt like more than a project. It felt like I'd put something permanent between me and the noise. The first official thing Eliza did as acting HOA president was schedule an open meeting, no agenda. No pre-written talking points, just a folding table on the community center stage and a promise to answer every question. It was the first time I'd seen that many people from Maple Hollow in one place without someone trying to sell tickets or raffle off gift baskets. The tension in the room was brittle, like everyone was waiting to see which side everyone else was really on. I sat toward the back, not because I had anything to hide, but because I didn't need to be the center of attention. That seat had been Karrenna's, and now it was empty. Eliza stood behind the mic with a folder in one hand and a yellow legal pad covered in scribbled notes in the other. "I'm here because we need to start over," she said. "The last administration left behind a mess, and some of it may be criminal. I've already contacted the county's Office of Community Oversight. They'll be conducting an audit." That got a reaction. Some gasps, some murmurs, and one very audible, "About time," from a man near the front wearing a landscaping uniform. Eliza continued. "Anyone who has received a fine, summons, or official notice from the HOA in the past 2 years, I encourage you to bring a copy to the next meeting. We're reviewing everything. If you were targeted unfairly, we will make it right." A woman with silver hair stood up, holding a stack of manila envelopes. "I have 14, and I never even got a warning before half of them." Eliza pointed to someone at the side table. "Give those to Greg. He's documenting all of it." I leaned forward slightly. That was the same Greg who'd approached me after the hearing, now apparently volunteering for cleanup duty. He looked up, met my eyes, and gave a single nod. Not acknowledgement, more like solidarity. And just like that, the room began to shift. People weren't just spectators anymore. They were participants. One by one, residents stood and gave short stories about warning letters for things like hummingbird feeders, lawn chairs left out overnight, and flower beds being 2 inches outside the color palette. Some of the fines had been paid under protest. Others had escalated to threats of lien filings. Eliza jotted notes as fast as they came in, never interrupting, never brushing anything aside. Then a man in a collared shirt stood up. His name tag read Detective Harlan, and he didn't waste time. "My office received a report from the county prosecutor regarding unlawful surveillance and unauthorized entry onto private property," he said. That triggered a wider probe. "We've identified at least 4 other incidents where the former HOA president entered backyards without consent, sometimes photographing structural components on homes she later attempted to fine." He paused. The room had gone dead quiet. One resident had a motion-activated camera inside his garage. "We're reviewing footage that shows her lifting boxes and inspecting personal property. That crosses into felony territory. If you believe you were victimized, speak with me after this meeting." I hadn't heard about that garage footage. That changed everything. Trespassing was bad enough, but rummaging through a homeowner's possessions, that was something else entirely. Eliza cleared her throat. "We're cooperating fully. I've already turned over internal emails and login access to the HOA's digital records. If anything illegal happened under Karrenna's leadership, it's going to come out." After the meeting, I didn't head straight home. I waited near the refreshment table, sipping warm lemonade from a plastic cup, listening. The mood had shifted from outrage to cautious optimism. A few people I hadn't spoken to in months approached and asked questions about the court case, how it worked, what to expect if they had to testify. I answered what I could, but mostly I just told them to keep records. Everything. Emails, letters, photos, time-stamped if possible. By the following week, subpoenas had been issued. The county wanted all HOA contracts from the previous 3 years. That included landscaping, security patrols, and the so-called beautification fund that had paid for Karrenna's koi pond, now suspiciously drained and covered with a blue tarp. No one had seen her since the resignation. Her house sat dark, mailbox bursting with uncollected flyers. At the next board meeting, Eliza announced the discovery of a second bank account, one not listed in any of the HOA's official ledgers. It had been opened in the HOA's name but with only 2 signatories, Karrenna and her cousin, a man who'd been listed on invoices as a consultant but had never once appeared at a meeting. Over $70,000 had been funneled into that account over the past 18 months. The room erupted. Someone shouted for a full forensic audit. Someone else asked if the HOA dues they'd paid had gone into that slush fund. Eliza didn't dodge the question. Some of them, yes, she said. We don't know how much yet. But we will. The very next day, a county forensic accountant arrived at the HOA office with a warrant. I saw him myself, blue blazer, clipboard, rubber gloves. He spent 6 hours inside, carted out 2 hard drives, a file box, and the desktop tower from Karrenna's old computer. By week's end, a warrant for her arrest had been issued. The charges included embezzlement, unlawful entry, falsification of financial records, and misuse of HOA power for personal gain. It made the local news, then the regional press. A photo of her walking out of a courthouse in handcuffs hit the internet like wildfire. She wore sunglasses and a windbreaker, but there was no mistaking her. The HOA scrambled to stabilize. Eliza appointed a temporary finance committee to oversee refunds and restitution. Greg, who'd been documenting everything, was promoted to compliance chair with one condition. No more weaponized letters, he said during his first announcement. This department exists to help, not harass. They started reimbursing residents, quiet checks hand-delivered. Some people cried. Others just looked stunned. A man who'd been fined for repainting his shutters got a check for $800 and a written apology. Turns out, his color choice had never actually violated any rule, it had just annoyed Karrenna. Meanwhile, I went back to my garage. I added a solar panel to the roof just to keep the lights running without tapping into the main grid. I built a small workbench, added pegboard for my tools. It was quiet, peaceful, and finally mine. But the best part wasn't what I built, it was what had changed outside of it. Neighbors started waving again, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. A few even dropped by to ask if I could help them understand their property lines better. I printed out copies of the plat map and showed them how to read it, where easements started, how setbacks were measured, what the county considered common land. One evening, Eliza stopped by. She stood at the edge of my driveway holding a manila envelope. "I wanted to give you this in person," she said. "It's a formal apology from the board, signed and notarized, plus a resolution removing any mention of violations from your property file." I took the envelope, nodded. "Appreciate that," she hesitated. "You've got a good eye for details." "Ever thought about running for a seat on the board?" I laughed. "I just wanted a garage, not a revolution," she smiled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." She left, and I went back to organizing my socket wrenches. A soft breeze rolled in through the open side door, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass, and something else, something that hadn't been in the air for a long time: trust. It didn't come easy and it didn't come cheap. But it had finally started to grow, right there beside my newly painted siding and gravel path, and not even a koi pond could block that view. By the end of the month, the neighborhood looked different, not physically, but in the way people moved through it. There was less tension in the eyes of the mail carrier, fewer hushed conversations near the mailbox clusters. It was as though a fog had lifted, revealing just how much had been tolerated under the guise of community order. Then the subpoenas started turning up results. The county audit uncovered a series of payments made through the hidden HOA account to a company called Brightscape Consulting. On paper, it provided landscaping assessments and community planning services. In reality, it was registered to a P.O. box in Nevada and had no employees, no website, and no track record. What it did have was a single bank account, which, after a forensic trace, was found to funnel directly into a private trust owned by Karrenna's brother-in-law. Detective Harlan brought the findings straight to a grand jury. Charges were bumped up now, including wire fraud, interstate financial deception, and conspiracy to commit theft under false pretenses. The FBI got involved when it became clear some of the funds had crossed state lines. They called it a low-scale HOA embezzlement ring, but for Maple Hollow, it felt like the kind of plot you'd see unravel in a documentary. Meanwhile, Eliza announced a full freeze on all HOA discretionary spending. The board now operated under a temporary oversight committee, made up of volunteers from the neighborhood who had no prior affiliation with the previous administration. I wasn't on the committee, but I helped them draft a new charter, one that required public budgeting, rotating leadership, and mandatory conflict of interest disclosures. One afternoon, I was in the garage, routing the edge of a cedar shelf when a county inspector named Meredith stopped by. She was there to verify boundary lines for 3 properties that had been flagged during the audit. She asked if I still had the original plat survey. "Filed and laminated," I said, handing her a copy from my workbench drawer. She reviewed it, nodded once, then leaned on the frame of the garage door with her clipboard balanced against her arm. "This might sound strange, but you're the reason we caught the whole thing." I set the router down and raised an eyebrow. "Most people roll over when someone in a position of power pushes them," she said. "You documented everything, you kept records, you used their tools against them. That rarely happens." "Didn't feel brave," I said. "Felt like I was just trying to keep my space. That's usually how it starts." She left with a copy of the plat and a promise to send me a certified boundary confirmation. I watched her drive off, the sun catching the edge of the clipboard through her window. It struck me that the neighborhood had gone from fearing inspections to welcoming them. Later that week, the FBI released a joint statement with the county prosecutor's office. The final tally of misappropriated funds had reached over $122,000. Karrenna's brother-in-law had already agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testifying. The court documents revealed a staggering level of manipulation. Fake invoices, duplicate charges for fake services, and multiple attempts to bribe inspectors under the table to issue violations that would justify new fees. At the next community gathering, Eliza didn't bring a speech. She brought a notary and a stack of new voting forms. This is a complete rewrite of the HOA's authority. From now on, any structural rule changes, fines, restrictions, even landscaping guidelines require a community-wide vote with at least 60% participation. People lined up without needing to be asked. After the voting wrapped, Greg approached me, holding a clipboard stained with pen marks and fingerprints. "We tallied it, 92% approval." "That's the loudest silence I've ever heard," I said. He nodded. Karrenna used every inch of silence to tighten her grip. Now we're using it to close the book. There was still work to be done. A few residents had court dates of their own, seeking reimbursement for liens that had been filed using fraudulent violations. Others were submitting claims to the state's Homeowner Rights Board, hoping to get their records cleared. But the tone had shifted. One evening, I got a knock on the door from a kid maybe 12 or 13 holding a clipboard and wearing a backpack too big for his frame. "Hi. I'm doing a school project on community reform and my teacher said your garage case was part of it. "Can I ask you some questions?" I stepped outside and leaned against the railing. "Sure, what do you want to know?" He looked down at his notes. "Why didn't you just take the garage down when they told you to?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because when someone tells you to give up what's yours without a real reason and you let them, they don't stop there." He scribbled frantically for a moment, then paused. "Did you think you'd win?" "No," I said. "But I knew they were wrong. That was enough to keep going." He thanked me, then bolted down the walk. I watched him disappear around the corner, clipboard bouncing against his back. The final hearing took place in a federal court. Karrenna, now facing 7 felony charges, stood beside a defense attorney who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Her plea deal was rejected. The court offered her a reduced sentence if she named everyone involved in the fund transfers. She refused. The judge handed down a sentence of 5 years with no parole, plus restitution for every resident affected by her actions. A court-appointed trustee took over her home, which was to be sold to repay the embezzled funds. Word traveled fast. Within hours, someone had taped a handwritten sign to the community bulletin board. "Justice has no HOA limits." I didn't write it, but I couldn't stop staring at it. The weeks that followed were calm in a way I hadn't realized was possible. No warning letters. No suspicious cars circling with cameras. The new HOA board operated openly. Budget meetings were live-streamed, and policy changes were posted online for feedback. One Saturday morning, I stood in my garage doorway, sipping coffee, watching a few kids ride scooters down the street. A woman planting tulips across the road waved. I waved back. Greg pulled up in his truck, stepped out with a flat box under one arm. "We figured you deserved this," he said, handing it over. Inside was a framed certificate. At the top, in bold serif font, it read, "Community Integrity Recognition," and beneath it, a simple line, "For standing firm even when the ground shook." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, and he nodded back. After he left, I hung it on the garage wall just above the pegboard. Not because I needed the reminder, but because it felt like a closing page, quiet, earned, and final. And for the first time since moving into Maple Hollow, I didn't feel like I had to watch my back. I just lived.